And what we attempted to do from the outset was to build a network, a community. And you heard that term used quite a bit across this morning as well, because in that we needed to try and build consensus. And you heard Tim in particular, who we've worked with a couple of times, talking about the need to build consensus. What we found from the past is whether it was a guideline, a recommendation from a report, it didn't matter what the mechanism was, there was an individual approach to, first of all, whether it was accepted or not, and then whether it was implemented. And we don't need to have HICWA coming on and tell us that we didn't do it. We need to find a different way to try and achieve in that. What our approach has been, we've worked with 6 maternity networks, which has been a highly effective structure for us to try and build some of that consensus. We're certainly not there yet, but we do have a very collaborative approach to trying to ensure that there is a higher degree of standardization. But obviously in each location, you know, we're talking about fundamentally different services with different ranges. So we have to try and build that in and build it in over time. So putting in the resource base was a good start. And I think now we're looking at how do we standardize some of those key elements. So great question. The journey has started, but we're certainly not at the end of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if Richard, do you have anything to?
No, I have nothing to add to that. I think that's a fair assessment.
Absolutely rounds it up. Great, thanks, Killian. And I'll put a question to you also. I know in your talk you spoke about organizational culture and how sometimes that's kind of overlooked, and that it needs to be addressed. How do you see that happening? If you could speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, I think in some maternity units, and from personal experience, I think some departments are very separated from each other and at times fail to oversee the bigger picture of the whole hospital or unit as a whole. And I think that needs to be addressed a little bit, that staff between different departments are aware of what's going on in the other departments and where problems might arise that affect them by default. So yeah, I think it is a little bit underappreciated still in the Irish units.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, and great talk. Riona, if I could come to you next. You spoke about the National Implementation Programme, which was a great initiative. It was great to hear about. Did you come across any kind of hurdles or roadblocks with that implementation side of it? If you could speak a little bit to that.
I suppose we did a little bit, Jessica. Now, there was a great appetite for the implementation of the standards. I suppose at the time that we started the implementation, people on the whole were ready for them and the hospitals were ready for them. However, there were some people felt that they were already they were already had their own standards in place and didn't see the need to actually implement our standards. They had their own standards. I suppose what we did was we took a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach and we worked with everybody, included everybody. And what we said to them really was that this was the framework for them to work and to implement the standards and standardized care around the country. We didn't, I suppose, it had to be done this way, but this was the framework there for them. And I suppose by working with people, being available to people and including people in the implementation, everybody came on board. So I suppose from that point of view there was that, and then the other hurdles that we had was, I suppose, really would be things like, a lot of the maternity units in the country aren't they're not new buildings, so they don't have suitable facilities, and they have all worked really, really hard to work around that. So they would have been other hurdles we would have had to come across, is environmental ones, I suppose.
Yeah, it's good to kind of know about what those roadblocks might be, and in order to kind of find out how we can overcome them across the board. And Peter, thank you for joining us. On that note, I suppose we do tend to see recommendations coming through, and the big question is, how do we implement them? Can you kind of speak a little bit to that in how we can really kind of improve the implementation side? I know there are lots of recommendations kind of floating around out there, and we heard some fantastic ones this morning. Can you say a little bit about what work needs to be done for the implementation side?
Well, I think the first consideration is that you have got to attach some significance to each of the recommendations. They're not all equally valid. And if you have a review that is intrinsically flawed, you're unlikely to get recommendations of any value out of that that are related to the incident. And so recommendations that have national implications really need some central point of clearance to make sure that they do fulfill the criteria that Anna laid down, that they are relevant and that they are implementable. So I think on the one point from Anna's is if you have many reviews going on in different areas that are totally unconnected, you're going to get an awful lot of recommendations that are duplicated, and some of them may not be implementable. And as Tim said, this is not a problem that's in Ireland only. He was talking about, there's 1,000 recommendations a year relevant to obstetrics or maternity care in the UK, and that really is, death by 1,000 recommendations. You cannot have 1,000 recommendations that are meaningful and implementable. So they need to be looked at centrally and prioritized, I would have thought, before we really make any headway into implementing them in a sensible way.
Absolutely. And we've had a question come in here from Carmel Keane, who said, who will be responsible for the standardisation of systems in Ireland? Is there currently a body into whose remit this would fall? So perhaps Richard, if you,
Generally not. Most of the standard, as Anne pointed out this morning, an awful lot of our recommendations come from reviews that are done. They come from the audits that we undertake in INPEC. They, in the future, may come indeed from the obstetric oversight team coming from the Women and Infants program. So I think they're always going to come from some different places, but probably what we need is when a recommendation is made, it needs to be probably made in discussion with the appropriate bodies. So for maternity, we probably have to talk to National Women and Infants, as we do in INPEC, so as to decide, is this something that can be done, not done, which is a reasonable response. And if it's to be done, who's doing it and who's responsible for it. So I don't know that you can have a single standardized group, but in the end of the day, the people who are organizing the service have to either just take on a recommendation or not.
Absolutely. Thanks for that question, Carmel. And I know in your talk as well, you did kind of speak to relevant stakeholders involved in making the recommendations. Peter or Killian, perhaps, could you speak to what agencies, persons should be involved?
So I was reading something at the bottom of the screen there, which caught my eye. I didn't quite catch if it's for me, the question. Could you just?
If possible, Peter, that'd be great. Yeah, it's what agencies, persons, just quickly, I suppose, should be involved in this was another question that came in.
Okay, well, I would have thought, as Richard intimated, NWIP, one of our roles is through the National Maternity Strategy to try to standardise the approach of maternity care in Ireland. Now, this is only achievable up to a certain point, but we have been given a role in standardization, and I would have thought that if we're to fulfill that role effectively, then one of the things is that we should be involved in in advising what recommendations are appropriate and implementable. So I'm not, as it were, looking for work to come our way, but I would have thought that this is one of the things that we probably were set up to do.
Absolutely, great. Thank you so much. Fiona, I think Fiona, if you're there, I'll put the next question to you. You spoke about the improvement that you saw through your re-audit. Can you speak a little bit about what was the main driving force, do you feel, behind that? What do you expect to see with the next re-audit with what you have put in place?
I think I suppose it was really buy-in from all the staff. We did an education session with all the postnatal staff, so there was open communication. We had met with frontliners and with senior managers to identify where key learning would need to take place and how they would see the rolling in for education. So they knew the education would be taking place, and this implementation was based on best evidence and on an audit for best evidence-based practice. And there was the support of the practice development team and the MNCMS trainer as well to support staff from both the documentation point and safe care. So I think really once they knew it was evidence-based and based on safe care, we had two winning factors straight away. It was clear communication, and we followed up with the staff then with the follow-up audit to show them, you know, this is being done well, you can actually see it, we're supporting you. And then there was follow-up with the policy, and I think the clear algorithm, the one-page algorithm, gave them clear reviews. You know, they thought it would have been a little, you know, there was a little bit of, you know, we have to do two parts as opposed to it was one part previously, but you know, like that, you have to move with best evidence. And I think it goes back to communication and follow up then. And you know, I was speaking with even students and said they had forgotten that it was just post up till that they'd moved on with the new changes. So you know, it's again, it's buying in with staff.
Absolutely, and certainly seeing those changes and improvements would give that encouragement, I think, across the board, doesn't it, when you can see the outcomes? Absolutely.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And a question for you is, you know, you spoke about the training that was involved and really clearly defining the roles seemed to really benefit the implementation. Can you speak a little bit more about that and how you achieved it, clearly defining those roles for each of the multidisciplinary team members?
Thank you for that question. I think in recent times, as babies are surviving at the smaller gestational ages and smaller birth weights, but the numbers aren't increasing hugely, and the numbers of staff we have to train have increased slightly, that in order for people to have expertise, we actually recognise that we have to do more and more work on simulation. And that in relation to some of our trainees, you know, we would have 10 NCHD at registrar level to be trained every year, but only 120 babies born less than 1,500 grams, that their opportunities are fewer and fewer. And we recognise really that some of them can go through some number of months into their year without having any opportunities at all. But obviously for the babies, it's important that their transition and their handling and the care they get in the first 24 hours is really optimal. So when we actually did some simulations and, you know, got people to run or to work in their own role, even several months into their training, they were still very hesitant about what their role actually was and who was going to do what and who was going to help them and whether or not they'd get opportunities to do procedures. So we have focused very much on that. And during this project, we have really improved people's understanding of their role and prepared them for when they get the opportunity, really. And while we have, you know, recruited just very experienced people to undertake procedures on the very small babies initially, we do focus on training all our NCHDs on more stable and, you know, babies in the neonatal unit who have transitioned and are a little bit older. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think it is well recognised in all neonatal units now that we have to rely on simulation more. So we have put a huge amount of focus on that.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Anne. Great insight and a lot to be learned from it, absolutely. And then Lavanya, a question for you, I suppose, a little bit more specific to what you found with your research was, you know, a bigger discrepancy among group 5 in the Robson 10 group classification system. Do you have any kind of, I suppose, ideas as to why this one seems like more of a stumbling block? Oh, Lavanya? Can you hear us? Okay. That's all right. We can come back if Lavanya feels to answer that question in a bit. And Peter, I'll come back to you. There's a question has come in from Lawrence. Thank you for your question, Lawrence. What is the plan for OEST?
Well, that's quite a big question, and it would involve quite a lengthy answer, which I don't know that this is the correct forum for doing it, but possibly to give a very brief answer is that when it comes to reviews, there are some pockets of excellence in the country, and that they really are excellent. There are possibly the silent majority that tolerate the process of reviews, and then there are some that are quite resistant. So to carry on the theme of standardization, one of the aims of OEST would be to bring some degree of standardization as to what's reviewed, how it's reviewed, and how the learning can be best presented and extracted. Now, that's kind of a very much a helicopter view, but it is currently, the obstetric event support team is currently operating in the southwest, Limerick and Ceuta, and the hope will be that it'll be rolled out to phase 2 towards the end of the first quarter of this year. But I could say an awful lot more, but given that it's not central to this meeting, maybe I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Peter. Richard, I don't know if you have any kind of final closing statements, as I think our time for questions and answers is coming to a close.
Very good. No, well, thanks everybody. Apologies for the technical problems we've had today, and I'm grateful that people have adapted to those on various different options. And I suppose from the morning, I think we've actually had some really good practical talks about, really, I think when we put out the title for the day of recommendations to implementation, it was very clear what we wanted to try and get, and I think the talks this morning have shown us some good examples of that and shown us some of the problems with achieving it. And the one message, I think the one message from the morning is that very often, because we do audits on bad outcomes, we talk about bad outcomes. And I think in my introduction this morning that maybe we need to start looking at some of the good things we're doing, and hopefully that'll come with the likes of the OEST as well, that they'll be bringing messages of good as well as learning, because learning can be about good things and all the rest of it as we move forward with the maternity services. So we'll see you all in the afternoon when the theme will continue, and thank you very much for your those who spoke, those who joined the panel, and for those who joined online for the morning sessions. So enjoy your lunch.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
And just to let all know, we will continue to use this Zoom link for the afternoon session. The talks will also be shown starting at 1:30 from the on-air platform, but if you are struggling with that platform, then please stay on this link at 1:30. We will start again here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.